Today you are going to take a look at a modified argument model for use in your persuasive speech. Here are a few definitions of argument by dictionary.com. An argument is a discussion involving differing points of view, debate. An argument is a process of reasoning, a series of reasons. 3, a statement, reason, or fact for or against a point. Your definition of argument for this class is closest to number 3, a statement, reason, or fact for or against a point. It also involves a little bit of the definition in number 2. You need to remember that your whole speech is an argument, and you use arguments in your speech. We're using that word in a couple of different ways, but by the end of this PowerPoint lecture, it should be pretty clear to you how your whole speech is an argument and you use arguments within your speech. So let's talk about building arguments. There are basically 2 parts to an argument, claim and evidence, sometimes called conclusion and reasons. But there are other factors at play in an argument as well. You'll learn more about this if you ever take a critical thinking and argumentation class, which you should. For our purposes, there are 3 things you should use to build an argument in a public speech to a lay or general audience. You need to make claims. You need to support those claims with evidence, sometimes called grounds, which may sound familiar if you watch court TV and someone says, "I object," and the judge says, "On what grounds?" That just means, what evidence do you have for objecting? And finally, to connect them, a warrant. So let's take a look at each one of these in turn. Claims. A really straightforward definition for a claim: a statement a speaker wants an audience to agree with. Your major claim in a persuasive speech is called your, I hope you said thesis. That is your major claim. In addition to a major claim, you're also going to have subclaims. So let's take a look at some examples. An example of a major claim and subclaim from a persuasive speech. This one happens to be on false confessions, and it's from a previous edition of your textbook. This student gave a speech on false confessions, and this was their thesis. It's too easy to promote and create false confessions. This is the claim that the speaker wanted the audience to agree with by the end of his or her speech. But in addition to a major claim, you're also going to be making subclaims throughout your persuasive speech. Here are a few examples of subclaims that the speaker from this particular speech made. False confessions are more than occasional. If the speaker can get you to accept that, then they are that much closer to getting you to accept the thesis. Here's another subclaim. We can all be coaxed into giving a false confession. If the speaker can get you to believe this statement, you are much closer to believing, buying, or accepting the major claim of the thesis. Another subclaim. Police officers are trained in extracting confessions, truthful or not. If the speaker can get you to accept that police officers are only interested in confessions, not the truth, then you might be closer to saying, "You're right, it is too easy to promote and create false confessions." These subclaims were in the main points of the speaker's persuasive speech: the problem, need, solution, satisfaction, steps. So where did they find these? How did they know that these were the subclaims they needed to use in order to support that major claim? 3 places. They did their research. When they were reading articles about false confessions, these claims kept coming up, and so they knew they were important. They also probably did a little audience analysis and talked talking to their audience, they found out that people said, "I would never confess to a crime I didn't commit." And so the speaker knew he had to make sure that everyone knew that they could be coaxed into giving a false confession. And finally, in addition to research and audience analysis, you can figure out these subclaims by just using your mind. What are the ways to break down this bigger thesis into smaller subclaims in order to organize my speech? One more thing to think about in terms of claims, and that is there are 3 types of claims. This is important for you to know because as the speaker, you need to know what you're asking of your audience. Are you asking your audience to buy a claim or a proposition of fact? Propositions of fact are questions of truth. That is, you are asking your audience to believe in a truth. Perhaps you are familiar with the controversy surrounding the documentary Blackfish and SeaWorld. Well, that's a great topic to do a persuasive speech on, and it would use all the different types of claims or propositions that we are going to look at today. A proposition of fact involving the controversy between the Blackfish documentary and SeaWorld would be, animals at SeaWorld are mistreated. That's a claim of fact. It's a question you can answer with true or false. True or false? Animals at SeaWorld are mistreated. If you wanted to convince your audience to not go to SeaWorld anymore, you would have to convince them that animals at SeaWorld were mistreated. That would be a subclaim. Another type of claim or proposition is a proposition of value. These are questions of worth. What is my evaluation? They're sort of one step beyond propositions of fact. If we return to the SeaWorld persuasive speech, an example of a proposition of value would be, orcas are too majestic to hold in captivity. Now you're asking the person to make up their mind based on the worth or the value of an orca. And the phrase we're looking at is too majestic. If you want to convince your audience to not go to SeaWorld on their next vacation, you would probably need to convince them that orcas are too majestic to be kept in captivity. That would be a subclaim that would support your major claim, your thesis. And finally, we have propositions of policy or a claim of policy. These are questions of a course of action which answer the question, should we do this? Back to the SeaWorld example, we should not visit SeaWorld. That is a claim of policy when it comes to our persuasive speech. Your thesis should be a proposition of policy because the organization of your speech includes a solution, and propositions of policy advocate a course of action, which is just another way of saying a solution. All right, enough of claims. Let's move on to evidence. Evidence substantiates the claim. It illustrates the claim, it shows the claim, it supports the claim. Let's go back to that false confession sample speech. You know the claim. False confessions are too easy to promote. Police officers are trained in extracting confessions. We can all be coaxed into giving false confessions. Those claims are not going to convince anyone. What will convince them is evidence. So obviously the speaker had to find good evidence to support these claims. Here's an example. The Wall Street Journal reports that standard interrogation techniques are masterfully designed to leave people with almost no rational choice but to confess. This evidence supports the claim that we can all be coaxed into giving a false confession. In other words, if someone said, we can all be coaxed into giving a false confession, the audience member might say, really? I don't believe that. And the public speaker would say, well, According to the Wall Street Journal, standard interrogation techniques are masterfully designed to leave people with almost no rational choice but to confess. And you, audience member, are not an exception. Remember that an argument is only as powerful as its evidence, and evidence is only useful if your audience accepts it. Give them every reason to accept it, and remember to cite your sources. So now we have a warrant. A warrant may be new to you, but you'll find out that it's particularly helpful, especially in oral communication. A warrant is a statement that overtly connects evidence and a claim. So a warrant is a connector. You use warrants in everyday life all the time. You say things like, so that, and therefore, and that relates to. Those are connector phrases. Why do you need a warrant in a persuasive speech where you're making arguments? Well, sometimes speakers put forth evidence that really doesn't support the claim. So a warrant will force you to connect those two. Sometimes people make a claim and put evidence forward that's irrelevant. That's not good persuasion. Forcing yourself to use a warrant will not let you get away with bad persuasion. Also, sometimes an audience isn't clear on how your claims and evidence work together. Remember, this is oral communication. They don't have your speech in front of them. A warrant will overtly connect your evidence and your claim, giving your audience sort of a second chance to make those connections. Here's a little memory device to help you remember what a warrant is. A search warrant must provide some evidence connecting the person to the crime in order to be approved by a judge. So, a person can't just accuse someone of a crime in order to get a search warrant. There has to be some evidence. So remember, the warrant is a connector in an argument and a court of law. We need a sample putting all three of these together. We've seen false confessions and we've talked about SeaWorld, but here's something that's really important. Coffee. Here's a claim. People from Seattle spend too much on gourmet coffee drinks. According to the Seattle PI's website on May of 2010, Seattleites spend on average $674 a year on gourmet coffee like Starbucks. That is $283 more than the second highest spending city, Las Vegas, and twice what the average person from Dallas, number 10 on the list, spends in a year. $674 is too much. So we have a claim, a statement that the speaker wants the audience to reach. We provide evidence supporting that claim, and we provide a warrant that connects the two. The part here that usually confuses people is the warrant. So let me explain how this connects the claim and the evidence. Without the warrant, you are left with $674 a year on gourmet coffee. How do I know if that's too much? Maybe that's just average. The warrant is telling you that it's not average. It's more than the second highest spending city, a lot more. And that is going to link the claim with the evidence, because if you'll look back in the claim, you'll see the phrase, too much. That warrant clarifies that connection. So remember, in your persuasive speech, you are using claims, supporting them with evidence, and connecting them with a warrant throughout.